Привit, Privyet, and greetings from a glorious evening in Odessa, Mama. On the shores of the Black Sea, you might be able to just make it out in the background. Maybe also the Opera House should be in view somewhere over there. And in today's Vodka Vodcast with me, Connor Klein, we're going to deal with a subject that is never spoken about, as far as I can see, here on YouTube. If you are looking to date beautiful women in Eastern Europe, well, why are you even considering coming here or playing online, presumably talking to women who are actually here in East Europe, when you might be able to find the Slavic lovely of your life right back at home if you're in the West? Now, the genesis to today's video is actually a participant in my online coaching program, Consigliere Connor. Put a link to that down below in the description. And, he had previously paid for more than one matchmaker here in Ukraine. And basically, he'd been very disappointed with the matches he got and the results. And, he'd been over here in Eastern Europe. I've been coaching him remotely on the Consigliere Connor program, and he flew back to New York after he had had this unsuccessful previous attempt with a matchmaker and the leads he gotten from that, and he went on to Badoo, which is we'll call it a dating app that is popular in Eastern Europe, and he started to swipe on it in New York City. And what happened? He got lots of interesting leads and matches with Eastern European women, so women from Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, Moldova, do you know what I mean, Slavic women, in New York City. And they were, in general, looked more interesting, better looking, and a lot less likely to be scammers or looking for, a free meal or something than the women that he's been introduced to here by the matchmakers. And it gave me an idea then, why did you even come in the first place? When apparently you had all these potential leads and good matches in the US with women from this region. So if you are from the West, it could be North America or it could be Western Europe, for example, there are probably big communities of women from Ukraine, from Russia, from Belarus, maybe from Moldova, definitely in your country maybe, and more specifically, maybe even in your hometown, and you're not tapping into that and not getting mixed up in some sort of fantasy that you're going to come over to maybe Ukraine on a short trip and meet the love of your life because some matchmaker tells you that they have all the marriage-minded ladies, I love that one, waiting around here on their database, when it might actually be a better idea just to hang out in the Russian quarter of your city, then fly all the way over here. Now, I'm not saying that that's going to be necessarily for everyone, but I think it is another good option. And in today's podcast, I'm going to run you through a little bit where you can find women from Eastern Europe in the West, a few areas where they tend to be concentrated in diaspora communities, and my own experience with meeting Eastern European women while I was in the US and in Western Europe, and then a few tips about how you can go about finding them the best way. Now, this is obviously a really good resource if you happen to be near to a diaspora area from Eastern Europe in your hometown. If that's not the case, it might still be better to actually come and basically move to Ukraine. That is actually probably the most effective way to meet and have a serious long-term relationship with an Eastern European lovely. But in lieu of that, you should be looking at all your options. I just think it's kind of interesting that whilst Eastern European women are marketed, especially Ukrainian women, as these kind of Stepford wives who are just dreaming of a Western white knight to come in and save them from terrible Ukraine, when Ukraine is not that terrible at all. And in fact, those girls who are willing to leave might already be there waiting for you in New York City, like it turned out to be the case for my consulting clients. So let's get into, first of all, where are there big diasporas from Eastern Europe in the West? So let me start with the United States of America. Now, when I looked it up online, there's about 1 million people. About 400,000 of those are from Russia and 400,000 are from Ukraine. So that's already 1 million people. Now, not all of those are women. Maybe we'll say somewhere like half, and maybe not all those are single, and not all of those are within, we'll say, marriageable age potentially for you, right? But still, that's a pretty big, significant diaspora that you have. Now, let's compare that to, say, a country I used to live in Western Europe, which is Germany. And Germany has actually a massive, an enormous diaspora from the former Soviet Union. Germany has a population that's a good bit smaller than the US. It's probably around, I guess, around 80 million, more or less, while the US is, I think, around 300 million at the last count. Maybe I'm wrong in that. But you see, definitely, the concentration of people from the former Soviet Union is a lot higher in Germany. And amongst those, we'll call them people from the former Soviet Union who live in Germany, you have Russlanddeutsche, which are actually technically ethnic Germans who came back from Russia and Kazakhstan in the early 1990s. You have people, who moved because Germany's in the European Union, from, say, the Baltics to Germany, either since they got the freedom of movement in 2004 or a bit earlier, or you have a lot of Soviet Jews actually who got to move to Germany. Obviously, there's a historical reason for that after what happened with the Nazi occupation of right here in these territories in Eastern Europe and the Holocaust. Germany was a lot more open than other countries to accepting Jews from the former Soviet Union, especially in the 1990s. And there were a few Jews who were actually able to move to Germany, and actually became the bulk of the Jewish community there. Now, on top of that, you got Canada, and Canada has an enormous number as well. It's about 1 million as well. But they tend to be more ethnic Ukrainians than, say, you're going to find necessarily in Germany and in the US. That is very specific to Canada. In fact, I have some clients who've been on my programs who have grandparents actually come from the west of Ukraine. So that tends to be a common trend. And you'll actually, if you go to the west of Ukraine, you meet Canadians. Quite often they actually have family connections to the area. So there are a lot of people who have historical connections, so maybe field Ukrainian or Russian, and living in North America, and those who actually came directly. So let's focus a little bit maybe on the cities that you're going to find them in those countries. So in the US, you're going to find a lot of people from the former Soviet Union in New York. Most people have heard of Brighton Beach and Little Odessa in the greater New York area. You have Sacramento in California. There's a lot of people from the former Soviet Union who go there. Miami in Florida has a massive number of people from the former Soviet, people who speak Russian there as well. I know from having been there. If you were to go to Germany, then the city I actually lived in, Munich, has an awful lot. Also Berlin has a huge number as well. So there are just a few examples of where they're concentrated. Of course, you're going to find them in all big European probably capitals, like Paris is probably going to be a Russian community there, and also in London. I've been to London, actually hung out at parties in, from people from St. Petersburg in Mayfair, which is one of the more expensive parts of London. So you do have a lot of Russian speakers, people from the former Soviet Union who live in London, especially in the wealthier areas. It tends to be concentrated wealth. Why? Because a lot of rich people wanted to move a lot of their income, take a lot of that and move it out of this region, because they're worried about maybe it would be taken back off them again at some stage. So, for example, at one point, the most expensive property in London was actually owned by a Ukrainian oligarch who is from the eastern country, from Donetsk. Akhmetov is his name. So on top of the diasporas, you might actually just be traveling around and actually meet a lot of girls from Eastern Europe traveling in the West. So it is quite hard for them to get tourist visas to go to the US. So that's a little bit harder to go to North America, we'll say. Well, at least the US, and maybe a bit easier in Canada. And Mexico is actually really easy for them to go to. They can go in the work and travel program in the US. I know quite a few from here, even from Ukraine, have done that basically around the time when they're in college and stuff. It is a lot easier for them to travel in Europe, especially from Ukraine, because they have visa free to Schengen, which is not all of the European Union and all of Western Europe, but an awful lot of it. So they can actually go 6 months a year, 3 months every 6 months basically, and travel there. So you're going to meet a lot of people from the former Soviet Union traveling to Italy, for example. COVID travel issues aside, but that's a place that you see a lot of Russians go to, in particular in Greece, for example. You're going to have Turkey, big place for people from the former Soviet Union to go to and travel to. Also, if you go to Dubai, you're going to see a lot of people from this region there. So you might meet them traveling. They might also live in the Middle East. That's also something you see. You see a lot of girls actually who are young and pretty going to work short term in the Emirates or in the Middle East in general. Can be in some more dodgy professions, but it can also be in something that's just working in a shop or working in a pub, actually quite often, as well as a barmaid is something that's quite popular. So basically, outside of actually coming to countries themselves, if you live in the West and you live near somewhere that's a big tourist area, there are people from all over the world traveling, including from here, and you're going to have those specific places where there are big diasporas. As I said, some examples would be the rich parts of London, Germany, especially Berlin, and also Munich, where I lived, and over in the US, New York, Florida, Sacramento are some of the big places you find people from the former. So also Chicago, I forgot to mention Chicago. I think in the early 90s, a lot of people came from Eastern Europe, though a lot of those were actually Poles. So again, whether they're really Eastern Europeans, we wouldn't really call them Eastern Europeans today, more Central Europeans, but they do have still a significant diaspora there. And then obviously in Canada, you have in particular a lot of Ukrainians. So as I mentioned, I actually lived in one of the cities that has a big diaspora from Eastern Europe, and that is Munich in Germany. And I actually have to say, when I lived there, which is 10 years ago at this stage, I would say, I was a single guy there at times, and when I went out, I would say about half of the women that I ended up talking to were actually from Eastern Europe, either from Ukraine, Belarus, or Russia, because actually there, the better looking women tended to be from Eastern Europe. You're probably not surprised to hear that. So actually what I found is, and this is in part because I could already speak some Russian, my Russian wasn't brilliant at the time, but I had actually traveled to their countries. And because of that, as opposed to maybe the other, mainly German guys, obviously in Munich, I actually had some experience being there. I also had something in common with them because we were also both there as immigrants we'd also come from different countries to live in Munich. So I found I had a pretty good bond, an easy way in terms of connecting with them. And there were a lot of beautiful women from Eastern Europe, I have to say, in Munich. And definitely, as I said, 50% of the girls I ended up, hitting on turned out to be from Eastern Europe. So that's pretty good, including some contestants in Germany's Next Top Model, for example. And actually, the thumbnail that I'm planning at least to put here, I hope I do actually put it up to make it relevant, is a thumbnail from Miss Russia San Francisco, because actually when I was over in San Francisco, we went to that beauty pageant and we met obviously lots of beautiful girls from that region. That's a good example of my time in the US, where I didn't actually live in an area that was that had a big Russian diaspora, but when I was over visiting a friend in California, because he'd also traveled with me here in Eastern Europe, we decided to go because we knew it was on, and we made lots of good connections there. Still have those connections. In fact, that's something you can do if you live in a city where there is some sort of diaspora, there are cultural events from communities in Eastern Europe. You can go to those events and participate and add some value and actually get to know people from the community, which is a great thing to obviously get to do. You can also go to the areas where, if there is actually a big diaspora where they're based, go shopping there, go to the cafe or bar, the local Russian restaurant, and just kind of take an interest in the culture and get to know people there as well. And of course, they're going to be amongst those people to attract the women most likely. So when I was a student, I was in Washington D.C. and I started learning Russian, so I was really interested. My teacher told me that I should go to these events. And she basically encouraged me to go out with her and her husband, and then we meet all these women from Eastern Europe. So obviously I had no problem with that. It was pretty cool. And DC being the capital of the US, of course you have a huge number of culture events for most communities that move to the US in any sort of number. And on top of it, you have all the embassies. So if you're living in a capital city and it has, say, a Russian embassy, a Ukrainian embassy, a Belarusian embassy, a Moldovan embassy, whatever embassy it happens to be relevant, maybe also Central Asians from the Central Asian countries, you can go to those embassy events, and then of course you're going to meet lots of people in general from the region and take an interest in the country. And it's something that's not like going to a bar or going on a dating app where it's very obvious why you're there, but you're going to meet people more naturally if you're taking an interest in their cultures. That's something else that I did. I was genuinely interested in the region. I was actually studying the former Soviet Union at University of Grad School in the US. So for me, it was very pertinent to go to these embassy events. But of course, I met lots of beautiful women at them as well. So that's another thing that you can do. So now I've covered kind of cultural events, going to where the diaspora is based. But what happens if you are living in a city where there are no people? There isn't a big diaspora from Eastern Europe. Sometimes I have this on consulting calls where I'm prepping guys before they come here, and we'll tell them, hey, is there a diaspora where you live, say in the US, where you can actually tap into already and practice your Russian maybe or your Ukrainian before you come here? Sometimes there isn't. So what I would suggest in that case is basically that you change your geotag on a dating app like Tinder, and you just put it smack bam in the middle of Little Odessa in New York or Brighton Beach, whatever happened to be, and just start swiping, see how many connections you get, and then next time you're in New York, that's where you should be heading. And actually, if you are on a trip and you do have the means, like you've got a trip coming up to New York or you're about to fly down to Florida, well, go out to the Russian area or the Ukrainian area of the city and just go there and socialize and mix and get, it's not 100% sure something's going to happen, but you are putting yourself in that position where you will possibly meet women from the region without actually having to travel here if it's not something you can do immediately. So there are some of the tips based on my own experience, having lived in a few areas with Russian diaspora or in a more diplomatic setting or just cultural setting, and how I put myself in a position where I was going to meet a lot of women from Eastern Europe without actually being there in the region itself. And that's pretty, I have to say, not just my experience, also my friends' experience. They meet, once you're clued into an interest in this region and probably learned a little bit of Russian and maybe even been over here and gotten some experience in the region, when you probably spot actually women from Eastern Europe a lot easier when you're back home, and also you're going to be able to make yourself stand out a little bit more than the normal American or German or Brit or Irish guy who knows nothing about their culture or anything like that. And actually, when I think about it, I went back to Ireland. I actually went onto Tinder. It's a good few years ago now, and I wasn't getting very many matches back home. And I was kind of just flicking swiping just to see what kind of women were on Tinder in Ireland. And suddenly I got this crazy match. Easily one of the most beautiful women that you can see walking around in Ireland suddenly matches with me, and she has an Eastern European name. Met up with her, turned out that she was Belarusian. So there you go. And we actually, I had in my profile that I had been, I think, traveling or had photos from Eastern Europe. So this is actually what grabbed her attention. It's commonality and something makes us a bit more, I guess, relatable because we have a shared experience together, because I have been also to Belarus a little bit, not that much at the time, but I had actually been to the country, and that gives you a bit of an edge compared to the average Joe, the average Joseph walking around in Toronto or in wherever happens to be in the US, in New York, whatnot, because you do have that connection. And the other thing I'd like to say about maybe, it's just an observation. We do have this kind of phenomenon that I call the green card girls. So it is a bit of a stereotype that Eastern European women just want to leave the region because it sucks, and they see you maybe as the Westerner, as the ticket out there, the white knight who can save them and bring them to the prosperity and safety of the West. Now, that doesn't really hold true nowadays. Things are, it's not the 1990s where, the economy collapsed here and there was kind of disarray, and it wasn't even really that safe in a lot of parts of Eastern Europe to be walking around and living. That's not the same situation today, and definitely here in Ukraine, for example, to compare it to the 1990s has obviously been transformative, and actually quality of life here is pretty good. But you still have women who want to leave here, and you still do have some green card girls who want to get to America in particular, just to get the hell out of Ukraine. And that tends to be girls who are maybe, it's not so likely going to be girls, I would say, who are from Odessa or Kiev or something like that and over 25, because the girls who want to leave will probably have left pretty quickly and gotten out of here. But when they get over there, and they are the green card girls, so we'll say, taking it from 90 Day Fiancé, where I brought it up in the other vodcasts pretty recently, and I'll link them down below and up in cards if you haven't seen them. Actually quite entertaining to watch and educative at the same time. They get over to America, and then they realize, well, you also have the value gap, right? So they explain that very briefly. It's like, over here you might be a 7, maybe just primarily because economically, especially going to be a 7 maybe to a green card girl who wants to get over and get her green card in the US. That's going to be a lot of your value. And maybe because women here are better looking on average than, say, in the West, in most Western countries at least, her value maybe just based primarily on her looks might be like a 5 here, but then she goes to, let's take my own country, Ireland, goes to Dublin, and suddenly she's a 7 or an 8, right? And that becomes a lot of the issue for the white knight, we'll call him, who took her over. Maybe wife hunter Harry was successful and got a wife here, brings her back to the US, and then when he's over in, we'll say he's in LA, he's no longer an 8, because he's no longer the guy sponsoring the green card once she has it. Is actually kind of like average and maybe a 5 or a 6, and she's gone from a 5 to an 8, and that means that she's looking out, realizing that her value on the local dating market is way higher than, and you have this value gap. I have another podcast about it if you want to dive into that for your education, again, up above in the card down below in the description. So what happens if you meet a green card girl, we'll call her, in the US? That's where the term green card, because that's actually where the green card is from, but it could be the same as having residency, say, in Germany or the EU, another EU country, or maybe in Canada or somewhere else. Well, she's already used the schmuck, basically the white knight, for his purposes, which is to get residency and actually move. And now she's looking to upgrade in terms of a partner, now that she's moved to the West, and that guy could be you. Exactly, you're not going to be the guy who gets used with the marriage of convenience to get to the West, because she's already in the West, and then obviously you might be the guy who picks up the scraps and takes her off the white knight. That is your own moral judgment, whether you feel that's appropriate, whether you want to be with a girl who's already used the guy to get to the West. Maybe it just happened to be the coincidence that this didn't work out when she got there, but I find that as well, that an experience, I've met very beautiful women in particular from Russia in the West. They're still technically married, but it's obvious they're looking for a replacement for their husband. Some of them have only been in the country for 6 months. Yeah, pretty tragic. We're telling me, my friend, she also did the same. She found him through a marriage agent, and then they get over, and then they're like, okay, let's see what else is on offer here. That's better than the guy who basically sponsored my visa to get here. And you can be the guy who gets to, I guess, reap the benefits of that. Again, it's your own moral judgment whether you want to take advantage of that opportunity, and whether you really want to trust someone who's willing to use a white knight to get over to the West. But do whatever you want with that information. But that can be another great perk of actually, while you're there in the West, taking the opportunity to go and meet women from Eastern Europe while you're in your hometown. I actually met one woman I'm thinking about actually at a jazz festival, a Montreux Jazz Festival, when I was there. And again, what was part of the connection, I had been to Russia and I spoke some Russian, so I was able to make that connection with her, and that, of course, basically because of the commonality and shared experience, gives me a bit of advantage over the other local guys around me. So that was today's Vodka Vodcast. Maybe that's going to be a bit controversial, pointing out that, and I do focus on the guys who use matchmakers a lot when I make these videos, because they often buy into this dream that they have to come and pay some romance tour company to come here and meet the marriage-minded women of Eastern Europe. Marriage-minded is a complete cold read, because basically almost all women here are marriage-minded if they meet the right guy, and that right guy can be you. And you don't have to invest in all that. If you live near Brighton Beach, Little Odessa, there are also going to be women from the region there. So just, don't put all your eggs in one basket, like fly all the way over here when you could also be meeting women back home. Of course, if you're the type of guy, more like the guys around my high-level consultation group, Slavic Utopia Secrets Ukraine or Belarus, or the Russian version, which is going to open up pretty soon for enrollment, then you're going to move in situ here, and of course this is the source. But in the meantime, don't miss out on those opportunities that are there. Like I once had to, as I said, go back to Ireland for a couple of months, and I was able to meet a Belarusian girl when I'm traveling around, and when I lived in Germany. I also used that time. When I was living in Germany, I actually used to come to Eastern Europe quite a bit, but when I was there, because I was working there, I also went out with lots of local girls locally who were from the region. So basically tried to maximize all your options, regardless of where you live and what your work situation is, whether it lets you to travel a lot, allows you to travel a lot, or lets you relocate, like a lot of guys are doing, especially with this whole COVID travel mess. you're wondering what time of year I'm shooting this, it's the end of autumn. We're getting to the end of October, and we still have this nice weather in Odessa. Not that it's going to be this warm for much longer. I already got I just took out my parka from storage. But yeah, if that is the thing that's been happening, guys are moving more and more here for three main reasons. I have lots of content about it. Basically, the dating options here are better in general than being in the West. Obviously, with that caveat that you can actually go to the areas in the West where there is a diaspora and whatnot to meet women from this region. Second, cost of living here is dramatically lower in general than it's going to be in the West, so your money goes further and you get more value here, especially on the real estate side. If you're thinking of buying, an apartment with a view over the Black Sea, for example, a villa, or maybe in Kiev, a penthouse, whatnot. And there is definitely these times of COVID travel restrictions, a soft feeling of freedom that is superior, ironically, to the liberal Western democracies that seem to have forgotten a little bit about that in the last 2 years in terms of our rights to travel and go to a restaurant without a mask and whatnot. Whether you agree with that or not, definitely here there's a bit more softer feeling of freedom, the government really not being as much in your face as it is in the West over the last 2 years. So consider all those options. I'll also put a link down below to Slavic Utopia Secrets Ukraine. We're already in the middle of season 3. Season 4 will open up next year, but you can also invest in it now. Watch all the recorded content and then jump in those live streams with me and the other guys later on. When we open up season 4. So that's the end of today's video. I'm going to go enjoy a nice evening here on the shores of the Black Sea in Odessa. Going to be heading up to Kiev and filming a lot over the winter in Ukraine's capital. Leave me a comment down below if you have any stories of meeting women from Eastern Europe on your travels, maybe in other parts of the world, particularly in the West, and maybe with diaspora communities there, and let me know what you think. So, do svidaniya, do pobachення. See you in the very next video. Ciao, ciao from Free Ukraine.
SAR Experience.